I used to live in a small town in North Texas near the border of Oklahoma, and this town had many old and rundown areas. So when I was 20, I stayed in one of these neighborhoods in a worn-out apartment complex with my girlfriend. The place wasn't in great shape, but it was all we could afford. At the time, the area was known for crime, and people often talked about thefts and break-ins, and it wasn't uncommon to hear police sirens at night or see shady activity in the streets. However, I wasn't too concerned because before this, I had lived in Oak Cliff, a part of downtown Dallas that had an even worse reputation. One night I was off work and reading a book called Shogun in the living room. I had been reading for about 2 or 3 hours when I realized I needed to use the bathroom, so I put the book down and got up to walk to the back of the apartment. The apartment had 2 rooms and a bathroom. As I reached the hallway entrance, I saw muddy shoe prints on the floor. The prints were facing the living room, right where I had been lying on the floor reading. So I instantly became alert and pressed myself against the wall, worried that someone might still be in my apartment. My heart was racing as I carefully followed the muddy footprints down the hallway to my bedroom. The room was small with just a bed, a dresser and one window on the back wall, near the top of my bed. As I stepped inside, I noticed the footprints. Clearly, they started at the window, went across my bed, and then returned to the same window. The window was slightly open, and the latch looked loose, as if someone had forced it. My bedspread had faint smudges of mud, where the person must have stepped, and the sight sent a chill down my spine. I stood there, frozen, trying to figure out if they were still nearby. I spent a long time walking through the apartment searching for the person, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't find anyone. What scared me the most was that the only way in or out of the apartment was the front door in the living room, where I had been lying on the floor now. The strangest part, and I know this might sound unbelievable, was the blanket I had covering my window. It was a large throw blanket, folded and pinned up to block the window completely. But when I looked at it, the blanket was back in place, looking like it hadn't been touched, perfectly covering the window. But someone had to open that window to get in, and I know it, so they must have climbed through, carefully moved the blanket aside and stepped into the room. Then they walked through the apartment, down the hallway, all the way to the living room, where I was lying on the floor reading. It gave me chill to think that they might have been standing there watching me for a moment before leaving. At the time I was in good shape, but when I was lying on the floor, my back was turned toward the hallway, so I didn't see anything coming. After that night, I couldn't sleep properly for weeks, and I kept feeling like someone was watching me. My girlfriend was worried at first, but since she hadn't been there when it happened, she didn't understand why I was so scared. Eventually, she got frustrated with how nervous I was and suggested we move to a new place, but it took me a few years to get past it. But there are still moments when I catch myself wondering about what happened. I think about why the person didn't come closer, or why they didn't do anything more, and I still can't figure out how they broke in the first place. The thought of someone being able to get in like that and leave without a trace still creeps me out. This took place about 6 months ago when I was in my room getting ready for bed. It was maybe around 10:30 p.m. My curtains were closed, so I couldn't see outside while I was putting things away. I suddenly heard 3 loud knocks on my window. The sound was sharp and clear, like someone was standing right outside. My heart started racing, and I froze for a moment, too scared to move. Then a few seconds later, when my survival instincts kicked in, I bolted out of my room and ran straight to my dad. I could barely explain what had happened, because I was so shaken. I live with my parents and 2 brothers in a pretty busy neighborhood, so hearing noises is normal, but this knock was totally different. It was right on my window, like someone wanted me to notice it. Now the weird thing is, my bedroom faces the back of the house, not the front or the road for someone to knock on my window. They would have had to walk into the backyard. I asked my dad to check. He opened the curtains, but no one was there. He even went outside to look in the backyard, but it was empty. I closed my curtains and tried to forget about it, telling myself it was just my imagination, or maybe an animal I didn't want to overthink it. So I went to bed, still feeling a little uneasy. But the next night, almost at the exact same time, I heard 3 knocks on my window again, and the sound was the same, clear and deliberate, like someone wanted to get my attention. My stomach dropped, and I didn't waste any time. I ran straight to my dad. He came to my room and checked again. He opened the curtains, looked outside, and even went to the backyard with a flashlight. Just like before, there was no one there. But this time I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I was too scared to stay in my room, so I grabbed a blanket and pillow and slept on the floor in my parents' room for the next few nights. Nothing happened. Then about a week later I was home alone, around 8:30 or 9 p.m. I was on FaceTime with my friend when I heard 3 knocks on my window again. I panicked and ran to my parents' room to call them. They were out of town and told me to ask the neighbors to check. I called the neighbors, but they didn't see anything outside either. The next night it was about 1 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of knocking again this time. It wasn't just 3 knocks, it was more, and it sounded steady and deliberate. The noise pulled me out of a deep sleep for a moment. I thought about pulling back the curtain to see who or what was out there, but fear held me back. So I got up and went straight to my parents' room to wake them up. But by this point they were tired of the whole thing and didn't even bother checking. Saying it was probably nothing like before, over the next few nights the knocking kept happening. It wasn't every single night, but enough that I couldn't relax in my room anymore. So eventually my parents decided to let me move to a different bedroom. They turned the office into my new room and switched everything around, hoping I wouldn't hear anything anymore. At first it worked for about 3 nights. Everything was quiet, and I started to feel better. But then I heard it again, the same knocking, 3 loud knocks, just like before. This time I was really annoyed and decided to look out the window, and there I saw someone crouching down outside. I think it was a man, or maybe a very strong woman. They were wearing a grey hoodie and dark jeans, though I couldn't tell the exact colour because it was dark, maybe grey or black. I slowly closed the curtains and ran to tell my parents. Everything. They listened carefully and decided to call the police when the police came. They checked around the house but didn't find anyone, and since there was no solid proof, just my description, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested we install cameras around the house, especially near my bedroom window, to monitor the area in case it happened again. The next day we set up a security camera pointing toward my window, and a few more around the music house. We moved into our house around 7 years ago, and since then some things have made me feel we're not alone here. One of the first moments that shook me happened in the basement. I was looking for a tackle box with fishing hooks. Our house is split level, so the basement is partly underground. During the day, sunlight comes through the windows, so I usually don't bother with the lights. I found the hooks I needed and put them on a table near the closet as I was putting the tackle box back. I must have bumped the hook box, and it fell to the floor, scattering everywhere. I bent down to pick them up, and just then the basement light turned on. At first I didn't think it was anything weird, as I thought my husband had come home from work, since it was around the time he usually did. He found me in the basement and turned on the light to help me see the spilled hooks. I even said thanks to him, but when he didn't answer, I called his name. Still no reply. I went to check, and he wasn't home. I was alone with my dog. That light had never turned on by itself before, and it hasn't since the switch was flipped up, so something must have moved it. The doors were still closed and locked, and I still don't know what made the light turn on since then. Other strange things have happened one time. I was upstairs cleaning. We have an Electrolux vacuum that isn't the usual upright kind. It has a big button you need to press to turn it on, and after that there's another switch on the sweeper part to start the music rollers. I had just finished vacuuming the stairs and turned it off but I left it plugged in the living room because that was the next room I planned to clean. I went down the hall to switch the laundry, when I suddenly heard the vacuum turn on. My dog was with me, and we both turned to look at the vacuum. At the same time we could see it from the hall. No one was there, but the vacuum was running. It had never turned on by itself before, and it hasn't happened since. Another time my husband was home, and I saw something strange. We had just returned from grocery shopping. I was going to fill the dog's food and water bowls while he planned to take some groceries to the basement. We keep the dog food in a canister inside a small closet. Then I went downstairs to get the dog food and saw out of the corner of my eye what I thought was my husband coming down the stairs. It came down, stood behind me for a moment, and then walked toward the area where we keep canned food and drinks. I got the dog food and asked my husband, who I thought had just come downstairs, if there was more to bring down, but no answer. I asked again, thinking maybe I didn't hear him. Still no answer. I walked around the corner to where he went, but no one was there. I was alone in the basement. I took the dog food upstairs and found my husband on the other side of the house. I asked him if he had been downstairs, but he hadn't even gone down yet. The strange part was, my husband doesn't believe in ghosts or anything like that. He always ignored it, or made fun of me when strange things happened. Until this time he was home alone with the dog, and I was on the phone with him because I had just left work and called to see if he needed anything. He was talking to me when suddenly he went silent. Then he said, "Hold on, someone's here." I thought that was strange because I didn't hear the dog bark. He came back on the phone and said, "I'll call you back, I just saw someone at the door." So I waited for him to call back. When he did, he told me he went outside and checked the whole house, the outbuildings and the garage, but there was no one there. He swears he saw someone in a flannel shirt walking outside the door. Now we live far from anyone, and our closest neighbors are miles away, and there's no place for someone to hide that quickly. If it was a real person, I've noticed a lot of strange things in the house, but I always found other reasons for them. I even thought maybe I was going crazy and seeing things, until my husband saw it too. Now he believes everything I've said and seen. The house isn't that old. It was built in the 70s. We bought the house from his family, and as far as we know, no one has passed away here. But there was an older house on the property before this one, and it was torn down when this house was built. When I was around 16, my dad, brothers and I lived in an old, worn-out house far from town. We rented it privately, and my brother worked for the landlord to cover the rent. The landlord didn't seem strange to me, but that might be because I usually stayed inside when he came to talk to my dad, so he would never try anything while my dad was around. But one day I was home alone as my dad and brothers had gone out somewhere where exactly I can't remember. So it was just me and my dog, who stayed outside in the fenced yard, and I was in my room likely playing The Sims 2. My room had a window that faced the long driveway leading to the house. Now we didn't get visitors often, so the sound of a car or the sight of someone driving up was unusual. From that window I could see everything. A clear view all the way to the road that day. I kept glancing at the driveway out of habit, my dog barking in the distance, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I saw a car coming up the driveway, and it wasn't my dad's. Panic hit me right away. I ran through the house, closing all the blinds, turning off the lights, and making sure the doors were locked. When I looked again, I saw it was our landlord. He lived about 2 miles away, which made his house the closest one to ours. This wasn't the first time he had shown up without warning. It had happened twice before, and both times I was home alone. The first 2 times he didn't stay long, just about 10 minutes. But this time felt different. So I grabbed my baseball bat and hid under the table in the cooking area. I heard his car stop outside and the front gate open. My dog was barking like crazy. That made my heart race even more. I could hear his footsteps getting closer to the house. Then he tried to open the front door. I was shaking and didn't know what to do. So I texted my dad telling him what was happening. The landlord walked all around the outside of the house, stopping at every window and trying to peek inside. Our house was old and had 3 different doors that led into the house from the outside. I heard him trying to open all of them one by one. At first I thought maybe he didn't know I was home, maybe the last 2 times were just random visits, nothing to worry about. But then he started talking, calling out my name in a loud, clear voice. He knew I was here alone. I couldn't hear exactly what he was saying through the thick walls, so I slowly moved through the house, trying to follow his voice up and down the hallway, and that's when he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Eleanor, I know you're in there. Why don't you come outside? I brought something special just for you. You don't want to keep me waiting, do you?" His tone was light, almost playful, but it carried a sinister edge, making every word feel like a trap. I know if I had believed him and gone outside, things would have turned out so differently for me. He was outside for at least 30 minutes, or maybe even close to an hour. Eventually he left, but not because someone scared him off. He simply walked away, like nothing had happened. He was gone by the time my dad got home. When my dad arrived, I told him everything, every detail of what the landlord had said and done. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was really angry. Then, few weeks later, we moved from that house, but even now, I still can't figure out how he knew I was home. Music alone. When I was around 13 or 14, my friends and I decided to hang out at the park by the woods. We were walking down a quiet path when we suddenly heard a weird noise behind us. We turned around and my heart started racing. There was an older man, maybe in his 60s, wearing dirty clothes with his dog was standing beside him. We felt really scared when we saw him staring directly at us and walking slowly toward us, so without thinking we ran up some stairs to a bridge, shouting in fear. Once we were safely on the bridge, we glanced back at him. We thought we were probably overreacting, assuming he'd just keep walking with his dog, or maybe shake his head at the foolish kids who had gotten scared. But then we saw him, his head tilted up, eyes locked on us and limping quickly toward the stairs. We had just run up. Panic set in, and we ran as fast as we could down the path, splitting up at the fork. Knowing the paths would meet further ahead, we turned and ran as fast as we could, our hearts racing. We split up at the fork in the path. Knowing we'd meet again further down, we ran as quietly as possible, and when we finally met up at the spot, we were out of breath and shaking. We talked about whether it would be safe to go back the way we came, since it was the quickest and safest way to get back to the park's playground. After a while, we decided that we would sneak along the more open path where we could see better. We felt safe and thought we had just been imagining things until we reached the bridge. There, slowly walking down the stairs, was the man and his dog. But to our horror, we shouted and he turned, saw us and began walking back up the stairs without thinking. We turned and ran again. We ran along the path, taking random turns, and had gone far enough from there we hurried back to the playground where families were, and didn't go back into the woods for a long time. Even now, more than 10 years later, we still wonder why the man was so determined to follow us and what he wanted.